hopefully my enthusiasm for the content and my enjoyment of sharing the content came through. And as we're learning, it's nowhere near that simple. Endless drama, right? And every time there's a scandal, the approach to scandal seems to be replace it with another one and distract. But I don't think they're going to be very happy with what I say. Sadly, it's kind of a depressing view.
Hi en welkom allemaal. Ik ben Olaf de Maat. Op 12 november zat ik samen met de hooggeleerde Dr. Timothy R. Levine, communications professor van de University, ik even goed zeggen, de University of Alabama at Birmingham, achter de beeldbuis om met hem te praten over iets wat mijn blik op anderen voor altijd heeft veranderd. Daar wil ik zo meteen iets meer over vertellen. Maar eerst even over de college tour. Ik wil het werkende leven menselijker maken. Dat doe ik door organisaties te adviseren, af en toe door iets over te schrijven, heel af en toe door er zelf op een podium iets over te vertellen en 1 keer per jaar een seminar te organiseren met dezelfde titel en hetzelfde thema, Making Business Human. Nou goed, vanwege het COVID-virus konden we nu niet even 80 tot 90 mensen in een zaal stoppen. Dus ik heb besloten om die 4 sprekers die dit jaar op de rol stonden elk hun eigen bijeenkomst te geven met een klein publiekje. Met min of meer de insteek van de college tours met Twan Huis, dus 1 inspirerende gast die de interviewer vragen stelt en aan wie het publiek af en toe ook een vraag kan stellen. Nou goed, live aanwezig zijn, maar ook met een klein groepje, bleek nu ook niet haalbaar. Dus vandaar dat we allemaal achter onze pc zijn gekropen om online met elkaar de diepte te verkennen. Dus op 12 november zaten er zo'n 50 mensen met mij en Tim achter de buis om met elkaar het te hebben over een mooi onderwerp. En waarom wilde ik het daarover hebben? Waarom met Tim Levine ook? Waarom vind ik het nou zo belangrijk eigenlijk dat mensen meer van hem en van zijn inzichten weten? En dat komt omdat ik bijna precies een jaar geleden, op 23 november 2019, in Tivoli-Vredenburg zat, toen dat nog kon. En ik luisterde daar en ik keek daarnaar Malcolm Gladwell, de journalist en de schrijver van boeken als Outliers en The Tipping Point. En hij vertelde over de inzichten die hij op had gedaan naar aanleiding van het schrijven van zijn boek Talking to Strangers, dat toen net uit was gekomen. Hij noemde daar meerdere keren de naam van ene Tim Levine en zijn Truth Default Theory. Dat we eigenlijk standaard de ander op zijn woord geloven en dat er iets heel geks moet gebeuren. We willen van die stand, die Truth Default, afstappen. Ik was geïntrigeerd, want hoe kan het dan, als we elkaar standaard vertrouwen, dat we zulke ingewikkelde, op wantrouwen gebaseerde organisaties hebben en dat eigenlijk onze hele samenleving niet blaakt van het vertrouwen in de medemens. Goed, ik snorde Tim Levine online op en ik stuurde hem een mail om hem precies dit te vragen. En hij gaf me een paar eenvoudige, rake antwoorden en ook echt wetenschappelijke antwoorden die niet heel tendentieus zijn, maar vooral dit is wat ik weet en ook vooral lees mijn boek, Duped, zei hij, The Truth Default Theory and the Social Science of Lying and Deception. Nou, zo gezegd door hem, lees het boek. Nou, een paar maanden later had ik dat ook echt gedaan. Ik heb sowieso niet zo heel veel tijd om in avonturen te lezen, maar het is ook best taaie en veel kost, maar de moeite waard. Dus als je ervan houdt, check it out. Mooi rijmpje. Maar goed, niet alleen snapte ik na het lezen van Duped nog minder waarom we zulke moeilijke manieren van samenwerking erop nahouden. Op het werk en in de publieke ruimte. Ik was ook echt fan van deze man geworden. Want vooral die nauwgezette manier waarop hij uitwerkt en onderzoekt hoeveel eenvoudiger menselijke interactie in elkaar zit dan we eigenlijk denken. En hoe moeilijk andere wetenschappers en professionals zoals politieondervragers en rechters het maken, vind ik nog steeds heerlijk verfrissend. En het mooiste inzicht dat Tim's werk mij heeft gegeven is eigenlijk gewoon, we weten niet hoe het is om de ander te zijn. We kunnen niet in elkaars hoofd kijken. Maar het houdt eigenlijk niemand tegen om allerlei aannames te doen over die ander. Maar die aannames zijn, zoals dat met aannames gaat, helemaal nergens op gebaseerd. En als je dat ziet en durft toe te geven, dan opent zich volgens mij een wereld aan nieuwe mogelijkheden. En die wereld wilde ik op 12 november met hem en met de 50 mensen die online meeluisterden en keken onderzoeken. Het is wel goed te weten dat deze man, dus die Tim Levine, zijn hele professionele leven, uitspraak Olaf, zijn professionele leven gewijd heeft aan het bestuderen van leugen en bedrog. En hoe we leugenaars beter kunnen onderscheiden van mensen die de waarheid vertellen. Dat is nogal een specifiek vakgebied. En Tim is ook een echte wetenschapper. Dus zijn bevindingen en zijn verhaal, zul je merken, is heel specifiek en precies. Maar als je tussen de regels leest en luistert naar zijn verhaal, dan zie je dat ze implicaties hebben voor heel veel facetten van ons sociale leven. Dus ook voor ons werkende leven. En zoals ik net al begon, dit is de Making Business Human Winter College Tour. Dus het gaat ook over hoe kun je de inzichten van Tim toepassen op het werkende leven. En we zullen daar af en toe expliciet een uitstapje naar maken in het gesprek dat ik met Tim heb. Maar nog steeds is het denk ik ook aan jou als luisteraar en kijker om voor jezelf uit te halen. Wat zegt mij dit nu over het werkende leven? Hoe kan ik dit toepassen op het werkende leven? En ik wil nog één inhoudelijk voorbeeld geven wat in het gesprek en de presentatie van Tim niet terugkomt. Maar wel uit zijn onderzoek. En dat is dat als de band tussen twee mensen nauwer is. In goed Engels, when they are closer, have a closer relationship. Of als ze elkaar face-to-face zien, is de kans en de neiging voor mensen om elkaar te vertrouwen en te geloven groter dan wanneer mensen een niet zo nauwe band met elkaar hebben en niet face-to-face elkaar kunnen zien. Nou, denk dan aan het werkende leven, waarin mensen elkaar niet altijd zien, zeker niet in coronatijd, waarin je elkaar niet goed kent, waarin de band ook niet altijd even goed is. Denk aan misschien de relatie die mensen hebben met hun leidinggevende of met andere collega's van vervelende afdelingen. Nou, dan kun je al misschien eens voorstellen bij het vertrouwen dat er is tussen collega's en ook hoe makkelijk de samenwerking verloopt. Nou, op die manier bedoel ik, als je iets hoort uit het verhaal van Tim, waar je denkt, wat heeft dat nou te maken met het werkende leven? Probeer dan even iets extra hard na te denken. Dat is mijn uitnodiging aan jou. En vooral is mijn uitnodiging nu, ga lekker zitten, zet je koptelefoon op je hoofd en geniet ervan. Tot ziens.
So hello, everybody. My name's Tim Levine, and I'm the author of Truth-to-Fault Theory, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a new approach to the social science of lying and deception. And what I'll be talking about today is in my new book titled Duped, and I've been very fortunate to get some good press from people like Malcolm Gladwell. My book, Duped, was Malcolm was actually the first person who read the book, and it was the inspiration behind his book, Talking to Strangers, and through his work, a lot of people have come to know my work. And the real inspiration behind Duped and Truth-to-Fault Theory is my basic thesis is that human-to-human deception is really misunderstood. And to illustrate this point, I would like to ask you, how can we tell when somebody's lying? And there's been lots of research on this topic, and people definitely have opinions about it. And at least in the social science of deception, the dominant view and the view that I'm reacting against is what I call Q theories. And Q theories aren't any one theory, but they're a collection of related theories that all share a basic same logic. And the idea is that truths and lies are psychologically different. So when people are lying, they're more anxious, or they're more aroused, or maybe they're scared of getting caught, or maybe they're feeling guilty, or maybe they're thinking harder, or they're trying to be strategic and want to appear honest. And whichever one of these psychological states that's associated with lying, there will be behavioral signals that are consequences of these psychological states. And these behavioral signals, which can be called cues, differentiate lying and truth-telling. Consequently, we can distinguish when somebody's lying and somebody's telling the truth by observing these cues, which are probabilistically linked with deception. So in the research on deception that largely predates me and to which I'm reacting to, has focused on trying to identify these deception cues, and primarily of the nonverbal site, of the nonverbal sort. The research on, if you ask people, how can you detect lies? Research finds that the number one answer from around the world is liars won't look you in the eye. I find this just fascinating for two reasons. One, it seems to be pan-cultural. People everywhere in the world hold this belief. And second, a gaze has absolutely no validity in lie detection. Liars are no more or less likely to look you in the eye, look down, look one direction or the other. So it's interesting on how so many people around the world can have this belief that seems to be a common folktale. Research also finds, as I'll show you in my next slide, that people are poor lie detectors. They're not very good in the way deception is assessed, and that various cues that have been identified have very little diagnostic value. So in this graph, it reviews 289 prior research findings prior to 2006. And the way to read this chart is, here's the accuracy level on the horizontal axis. So 0 would be off the chart this way and 100% would be off the chart this way. And the frequency here is the number of experiments that found each result. So most studies find between 50 and 60% accuracy, or almost all find between mid 40s and mid 60s. And the average is 53-54% with standard deviation of 6. So almost all findings are triangulating around a common finding that people are just slightly better than chance accuracy. Add to this, the 289 studies that are summarized here, had all kinds of different features in them. Some involved just video, some involved audio, some involved audio visual. Sometimes the people who are lying have some kind of motivation for doing that, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the lies are spontaneous, sometimes they're planned. Sometimes people have access to honest behaviors in the past. Sometimes the research participants are students, sometimes they're experts. Sometimes there's interaction, sometimes they're not. And the results always slightly better than 50%, regardless of all of these characteristics. The one that really mystified my students is when they see the spontaneous versus planned lies. Everybody presumes that a planned lie should be harder to detect and a spontaneous lie should be easier to detect. But there's really no discernible difference between the two. What's more, people in these lie detection experiments overestimate their ability. So everybody thinks they're better at lie detection than they are. And there's no correlation whatsoever between how you perform, how you actually perform, and how well you think you perform. So people think they're good don't do any better than people who don't think they're good. But in general, people tend to be more confident than is justified. And people also underestimate their gullibility. Everybody tends to think that if somebody was lying to them, they'd be able to tell. And that seems not to be the case. Instead, people tend to be truth biased, which I define as the tendency to judge someone or some message as honest, regardless of whether it's honest or not. And truth bias is a very robust and consistent finding. And my work on truth bias and my development of truth default theory really began as an effort to understand why truth bias was a thing. And it became apparent to me that because it's such a consistent finding, it is a thing. So then the question is why? And as my thinking progressed, at first I thought truth bias, because it's called truth bias, had to be a bias. But now I changed it to the truth default, which is, I think, a less loaded term. And the idea that maybe the tendency to believe people is in fact a good thing and not the result of some kind of like cognitive flaw. So to give you an idea how I do my research, let me tell you a little bit about my cheating tapes. So I have over 500 videotapes of people lying and telling the truth. And in order to study deception detection accuracy. You have to know, in the language of the research, you have to know ground truth. So in everyday communication, we don't often really know what the truth is. But I need an experimental setup where I know for sure whether people are lying and telling the truth, so I can score it, whether you're right or not about them, with certainty. And I also want a situation where people have a reason to lie. So I put them in a situation where the truth's a problem for them. And it's up to them, they can lie or not. A lot of deception research uses what I call instructed lies, where people are told to lie or tell the truth. I try to go for a more realistic thing where you put people in a lie potential situation and see what happens. So here's how it works. I recruit students, usually first semester freshmen who don't know much about social scientific research, and are everybody's suspicious of experiments, but they're a little bit easier to they don't know as much about experiments, so they kind of fall for the premise of the experiment a little bit easier. And I'm telling them, hey, you know, I'm a communication researcher. I'm interested in teamwork. We're going to pair you with this other participant here, and together you're going to play a trivia game for a cash prize. And depending on the version, we're going to give you each $5 or $10 US for every question you get right. And so you come in, you and your partner sit down. There's a trivia master who, one at a time, asks you these 10 questions, which turn out to be pretty hard. And every time you're supposed to work with your partner to come up with the right answer. And every time you miss one, we pull a $5 or $10 out of the way. In between the third and fourth question, there's a knock on the door. The researcher has to go unlock their office door for their office mate who locked themselves out a few floors up the stairs. So you say, oh, I'm sorry, I have to let them in. They have a class they have to teach. I'll be back in about 5 minutes. And you hear a series of doors close. And the answers are left in a folder right there. The money's all left right there. And the partner, who really isn't another subject, but it's really working for us, suggests, why don't we cheat? They won't cheat unless the real participant does. But everybody's provided with the opportunity and the temptation to cheat. And some cheat and some don't. If they do cheat, they're cheating at a university, which is in violation of the code of conduct. Nobody's actually penalized for cheating, but technically they could probably be expelled from the university, or at least subject to discipline. The research is actually funded by the federal government. This is funded in the first versions by National Science Foundation and later versions by US Department of Justice. So technically, if they cheat, they're embezzling from a federal grant. They're also potentially hurting research findings, which also violates student code of conduct, and they know this is a federal grant. So if they did cheat, they have a reason to deny the fact. And so then after the trivia game resumes, they cheat or don't. Afterwards, we take them into another room and interview them about their experiences in the experiment. And we ask them, among other things, did you cheat? And we have different sets of questions and different people who are asking the questions, and a lot of different variations on this basic theme. But these are all on videotape. So we have this collection of truths and lies that I can then show other people and see if they believe people or not, and find out how good they are. So let me give you a feel for a few of these. So here's what those tapes look like. And if you're in a deception detection experiment, what you do is you see these tapes one at a time, and you're asked, do you think this person lies or is telling the truth?
I had a colleague left the room briefly. When she was gone, did you cheat? No. You telling me the truth?
Yes.
Okay, you think? When I interview your partner and I ask her, what is she gonna say?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, that's all I need from you for this one.
So most people, when they watch this guy, think he probably cheated and he's lying about it. Almost nobody believes him. And when I was talking about Q theories earlier, he just kind of is a walking, talking lie Q. He has all kinds of uncertainty and eye behavior and things that make people doubt him. And he is in fact lying. And out of the 500 or so tapes, he's one of the two, I think, worst liars in our collection. Here's a second example.
You know, I didn't call Rachel out of the room briefly. I should run upstairs. When she was out of the room, did you cheat? No. Are you telling me the truth? Yes. Okay. And then when I interview your partner and ask for the same question, what is she going to say? Same thing? Okay.
So participants in my experiments who watch this young woman tend to find this more difficult. Some people believe her and some people don't. Final example.
I have to ask, when Rachel left the room, did any cheating occur? No? You telling me the truth?
Yes, I do.
And when I interview your partner and I ask her the same question, what do you think she's going to say?
Same thing.
Okay. That's all I need from you.
So almost everybody, 90+% of people who watch this particular interview believe this person. In fact, all three of them were cheaters. But they all display kind of very different sorts of behaviors. And when you watch lots and lots and lots of these tapes, one of the things you realize is that although there might be things, knowing in hindsight that they cheated, that you could point to, whatever one person does to give themselves away is different than what the next person will do to give them away. And furthermore, there are honest people in the collections that do just the same thing. But I also show you these to show how deception detection experiments work. And if I show you a large enough collection of tapes, you will tend to be around 50-something% accurate at detecting deception in these. But you will tend to believe more, guess true more often than lie, and that is should be truth biased. However, this is what, so deception detection experiments find 54% accuracy. But in my experiments, right, there's another deception going on, which is the partner. And the question is, when I debrief these people, how many of them realized that their partner really wasn't a partner and really realized that they were working for the experiment? And the answer is it wasn't 54%. Here's a famous example I like to use. Some of you may know of this experiment. It's the Asch conformity experiments.
The Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example,
the actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group. and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1.
Lie.
2.
1.
Lie.
Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3.
See, lie.
3.
Lie.
3.
3.
So while the experiment is almost always understood as a study of conformity, and I'll tell you the results, about people conformed about one third of the time in this experiment. But what none of them thought is that the other people were imposters and that they were lying. So my question is, why is it when we do deception detection experiments, people are 54% accuracy, but when people are exposed to deception in experiments that aren't about deception, accuracy is much closer to 0. And one of the differences is in deception detection experiments, if I show you these tapes and I ask you, do you think they're lying or telling the truth? Right? You have to pick one and you know to think about it. But this brings me to my idea of the truth to fall. And maybe if you're just in this experiment, the thought that they might be imposters just never comes to mind. So my student, David Clare, and I did a couple experiments trying to see if this might be the case. And in these experiments, people either interacted face-to-face or watched on videotape. People who are lying and people who are telling the truth. And the lies and truths were either plausible or implausible. So for example, in the opening slides while we were waiting, there was some false information on those, and I hope I'm not spoiling something, Olaf, but I really was not drafted in the NBA, and I really didn't play in Soundgarden. But those are examples in my book of really ludicrous information. But then in the experiment, people are either prompted to make truth-lie judgments or just to ask open-ended what they're thinking about without prompting. And the videotape study, thoughts related to honesty, deception come to mind less than 5%. And in the face-to-face, less than 1%. And even for implausible falsehoods, it's less than 10%. So deception isn't even coming to mind if not asked, even when people are saying some relatively far-fetched things. And in a study that was just published, I think 2 weeks ago, we did the same sort of thing, except with a variety of online media. People were randomly assigned to see one of 6 tapes. Former President Obama or soon-to-be former President Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his rallies, on average, says about one false thing every minute. Or a TED Talk. The TED Talk was from Harvard psychologist Amy Cuddy on something called power poses, which is a pretty far-fetched idea that if you just sit or stand in kind of a more powerful, spread out position, that this is going to have major psychological advantages to you. Her research has not been found to replicate. But of course, people watching the TED Talk don't know that. A lecture on physics, and a news investigative report, or a satirical newspaper called The Onion. And with the exception of The Onion, thoughts of deception just didn't come to mind. And it didn't matter if people were watching Obama or Trump. It didn't matter if they were watching the debunked TED Talk or the physics lecture. And even with The Onion, most people were suspicious of it, although there were 3 people who appeared to believe it completely. But even those who were suspicious, unless they knew what the onion was, they went back and forth between this can't be right and finding themselves kind of suckered into it. So this now brings me to the kind of the main point, which is my truth to fault theory. And the idea is that normally during communication, deception just doesn't come to mind. And skepticism requires some kind of prompting or some kind of trigger. You know, if you're in a deception detection experiment, they ask you lying or telling the truth, that can be a trigger. But outside experimental circumstances, is it a situation where the person has a motive to lie? Or a really dishonest behavioral display, noticeable logical inconsistencies, things are said that you know are false, warning from third parties, and possibly implausible content can all trigger skepticism. And so once it comes to mind, then we think about it. My central thesis is that passive belief is really a good thing. It's a good thing in two ways. First, it's a good thing because most people are really mostly honest most of the time. I've done a whole series of studies, which I'm not going to talk much about here, but I can bring them up if you like. Asking people how often you lie, and the answer is most people don't lie very much, and lying's not normally distributed across the population. There's a few people who lie a lot, who we need to be on guard for, but most people are honest. So this makes believing other people makes us right, because it doesn't come to mind, they're honest, so forth. And it also lets communication function. So if we second guessed everything that we were hearing, then it wouldn't make much sense to come to lectures like this. We wouldn't want to, kind of read books and learn things. School would become, so it lets us pass along knowledge. It lets us cooperate with other people. It lets us form relationships. So believing other people and trusting other people is a very, very good thing, but it does come at a cost of making us vulnerable to deception. So truth to fault theory kind of rejects the idea of cues in a couple different ways. First, cues do not travel alone. When we're judging people as to whether they're honest or deceptive, we do look for cues, but we look for cues in combination or constellations of cues. And I call these constellations of cues demeanor. And so it's what you need to understand is demeanor, and it's the package of how people are coming off and not particular specific behaviors. And what these particular behaviors and demeanor do is they determine who we're going to believe or who we are going to suspect, but not who we should believe. Because while demeanor is unrelated to actual honesty, it's strongly related to how we perceive people. And this leads to my idea, which is one of the things that Malcolm Gladwell got Malcolm Gladwell interested in my work, is the idea of matched and mismatched communicators. And it's this idea of matched, mismatched communicators, which produces the low accuracy rates in deception detection experiments. So, if we look across large number of people, some people tend to come off very believable, and people tend to, they appear honest, so we'll call that honest demeanor. And there's other people who are less socially skilled and just don't come off so well, and they're kind of poorly demeaned. And this is independent from whether people are actually honest or actually lying. So if their demeanor matches their honesty, they're honest and they look honest, that would make them matched. Or if they're a really bad liar who's actually lying, then they're matched. And if you happen to be watching matched people, whether they're lying or telling the truth, then you're probably going to be right about them. But they're also mismatched folks. So mismatched folks can be the kind of smooth liar. These are people who come off very honest when in fact they're actually lying. But also the less socially skilled people who are honest, but they don't come off well. And so the idea is that if you're watching mismatched people, then you're going to be probably wrong about them. And if you're watching a whole bunch of people, like in deception detection experiments, you're seeing some combination of matched and mismatched people. Matched and mismatched will average out, and you'll get the slightly better than chance accuracy observed in different experiments. So this suggests a very obvious sort of experiment where people either get to see these types of senders or these types of senders. And so not surprisingly, I picked matched and mismatched senders out of my collection of tapes that I showed you. And when people see the matched, they're much better than 50%. They're up 70s and 80s, and when it was professional interrogators, it was above 90 for the matched senders. But when they say mismatched senders, then they're below chance, kind of in the 30 or 40% range. And if you average the two, then you get the 50 to 60% range prior. So once I figured out that it's who you're watching that determines whether you're right or not, then I set about trying to figure out, well, what separates out the people who have believable demeanor from the people who don't. And the people who tend to be believed are confident, they're composed, pleasant, friendly, they're engaged in the interaction, and they say plausible things. Sounds reasonable. What they don't do is they don't avoid eye contact. They don't appear hesitant or slow. That first tape I showed you was really bad about hesitation and uncertainty in voice. They don't fidget. They don't appear tense, nervous, anxious. They maintain a consistent demeanor across the communication, and they convey a conviction and not a lack of conviction. And the important thing to know is these all travel in packs. They're separate bullet points, but they're all correlated at above 0.5. So they tend to be perceived all as a package. And if you do the belief things and you don't do these, then you tend to be believed. And if you're telling the truth, people get you right. But if you're lying, people get you wrong. And if you don't do these and you do these, then people don't believe you. And if you're telling the truth, people are going to be wrong about you. But if you're lying, people are going to be right about you. So if demeanor makes us wrong about people, the question is how can we be better at detecting lies? So let me tell you about a study that changed forever how I saw deception. This was by Professor Hee-Sung Park now at Korea University. And prior research had asked how you can tell if somebody's lying, open-ended. And as I told you, what the research found is people said, liars won't look you in the eye, or liars look anxious. Well, Professor Park changed up the wording just a little bit. And instead of asking hypothetically, asked, think back the last time you were lied to. How'd you find out? And as it turns out, kind of these behavioral cue demeanor-based things only accounted for about 2% of the lie detection stories. Here's Dr. Park in the study. And instead, the way people detect lies outside the lab usually has something to do with some kind of evidence or some kind of confession. People come clean and tell you about it. So this study really got me looking away from cues and demeanor and looking for other things that can be used as deception detection strategies. And I ended up coming up with 5 keys to improve lie detection accuracy. When possible, you want to use evidence and fact checking. Evidence can be used in 2 ways. You can listen to what somebody said, and then you can, after the fact check it, kind of like a journalist does. Or you can be more sneaky, do your evidence and your research up front, and then ask questions people where you know the answers. And this is called strategic use of evidence. If you don't have access to evidence, you can listen not to how people are saying things, but listen carefully to what people are saying. And so long as you understand it in context, in situations that you're familiar with the situation, this can improve accuracy considerably. People don't lie at random. You want to consider sender motivation. You can use various kinds of questioning strategies to try to improve accuracy. And you can persuade people to be honest with you. And since 2006, there's been at least 24 studies that have found considerably better accuracy using these 5 different approaches to improving accuracy. And you can see the various experiments and the accuracy. And let me close by telling you about my final version of the cheating experiment. So I already told you about the trivia games and the interviews. In the last version of it, instead of having one of my research assistants read the questions and having them scripted, we flew in professional interrogators from the National Security Agency here in America into my lab, and had the poor unsuspecting students suddenly find themselves in a professional interrogation. And the upshot was that the professional interrogators were able to correctly figure out who cheated and who didn't, through their questioning 98% of the time. And they were able to get 85% of the cheaters to admit that they cheated without having a single innocent person falsely confess. Furthermore, when I took those professional interrogations and showed them to college students, they were correct 94% of the time, suggesting that it's not about these professional interrogators being super good at reading people, but instead being good at interacting with people and how to prompt information that was useful in detecting lies. Thank you very much.
I again imagine applause and cheers all over the Netherlands right now, because that. It strikes me with your last slide, but I guess with your whole research, is that it, without making it simple, but you ask such basic questions in your research. And someone here, Jorrit Smith, is applauding you right now through chat, I see. But you ask such basic questions. What makes me wonder, what did you, let's say, so to speak, of all people, do it differently than all the others that are in the deception detection research? What made you go on this path that actually, as far as you tell me in your book, no one has ever traveled before, together with of course, all your associates? But why did you start this path?
I don't know for sure, but I think kind of speculation. I'm dyslexic. I have a learning disability. And I was in special education programs in grade school. And in fact, psychologists told my parents it would be a waste of money to send me to college because I had no chance of being able to pass college classes. Really? And it's what I learned early on in life, having dyslexia, was that the learning strategies that worked for most people didn't work for me. But it wasn't that I couldn't learn. It was just I needed to kind of find a way that worked for me.
Right.
And so I think those early life experiences might have helped me. So I struggled in high school. to get good grades. And I found that as long as longer I stayed in school, it got easier and easier. So once I started getting to college, in high school, my teachers all wanted me to do things the way you're supposed to do them. In college, my professors were okay as long as I got the right answer, as long as I turned in a good paper. In grad school, it was, creativity started getting rewarded. So I think part of it might have been that I had early life experiences, that just because everybody thought this way didn't mean it necessarily was right.
Right.
And I think that might have helped me later on kind of break out of the kind of mind lock that was keeping progress from happening in this particular research domain.
Because as I understand it, you weren't in a mind lock to begin with. You were, from early on, had to try different ways, had to figure out how to do it differently, break the
Well,
mold.
I think I was, I was a victim of truth fault too. When I was, reading all the previous research, I was believing it, right? It's just the trigger to kick me out of it, I think, was easier because I had prior experience having success with
Right.
breaking out.
Yeah. So why do you think the mold isn't the way it is? Why do you think that folk wisdom and also science focuses on cues, while actually evolutionary, as I understand what you were telling about cooperation and things like that, we tend to believe other people. So why are we focused on, how to figure out if someone is lying, what's going on in other people's heads?
Again, this is really speculative. So society has a huge interest in people cooperating with other people and being trustworthy. So I think what happened is, rather than involving kind of real-time detection, cognitive abilities, which, would require, a better perception, it was probably just more efficient to develop societies that discouraged it. And so, every culture everywhere teaches their kids not to lie. Parents teach their kids not to lie, and views lying and deception as kind of a shameful activity, right? So I think it's more wishful thinking. We want liars to look down because that shows shame. We want liars to be fearful and anxious because this is a bad thing. So I think the folk wisdom kind of makes sense in sort of a wishful thinking sort of way.
Yeah, so that should mean that it's something that's been, it's not nature, it's nurture. So we have been taught to think that way.
Of course, nature and nurture go hand in hand, right? So nature shapes us to nurture in the way we do, and nurture in the way we do shapes our environment, which turns out, can shape our nature. Yeah. So, kind of our general hunch is a very strong tendency to believe people.
Right.
Right? And this works out incredibly well for us because the vast majority of communication that we face is honest. Right? So if you think about playing the odds, right? Our hunch is almost always right.
Right.
But social interactions are kind of a longer term thing, right? So if there's a few people out there that aren't trustworthy, then the trick becomes knowing who those people are. So we go along and we tend to believe other people, but we get fooled once in a while. But after we get fooled, at some point, if it's something important, the truth comes out. And then we learn, maybe I should trust unless I'm interacting with this person, right? And relationships don't exist in binaries, right? There's larger social networks, right? So if I find out that somebody's not trustworthy, I can tell people in my social circle, hey, watch out for that.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's also not really worth all the trouble to really sit down with someone, try to figure out if he's lying. The truth will come out anyway, and then he's caught, like, your soon-to-be former president.
Yeah.
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 So that was one of the things I think I laughed out loud when I read that in your book, is that the question that Dr. Park asked, how do you know when people are lying? And I'm not sure if that was her research or there was someone else, but one of the great answers I thought was after the fact.
Yes, that was her big finding. So when she, just asked people, told you stories of lies they detected, the vast majority were detected after that, and sometimes years later.
Right. So
Right?
it will come out if you're in a group, and then the person will be, maybe get a slap on the wrist or maybe shunned or whatever. Yeah, it will work out anyway. That's probably the trust we have in how the system will work. Right. Yeah.
And this is the huge kind of existential existence problem Donald Trump creates, right? So
Please elaborate.
We've got this person who's told now more than 22,000 lies, right? So the question is why would anybody believe him?
Right.
Right? And why isn't there social enforcement for this?
Yeah, and do you have an answer to that question? Because there's still 70 million people that, well, maybe didn't all believe him, but they thought, well, anyways.
I don't have a really satisfying answer to it. I think part of it is if you exist in America in a certain media environment, then you might not know that he's lying. So here, if you only watched Fox News, particularly the nighttime when they have the more opinion commentators on, and you only existed in certain Facebook groups and certain social media groups, and if it'd be interesting to do a network analysis of Trump believers. An interesting story from one of my students. I'm teaching a graduate deception class, and so my student was telling me about the difficulties she's having going to church, because her church is a very conservative Baptist church, and they're all Trump supporters. And her husband are closet liberals, but they don't feel like they can tell anybody, because they don't want to lose their church community. But I think it's people live in social environments where, if everybody believes Trump and you don't get exposed to it, right? Whereas there's whole other communities, right, where they live in it's almost like there's two different information.
Yeah, well, right, and it's
right?
sort of like
Network.
it sounds like a very big Ash experiment, with the line experiment from Ash. That if everyone around you is saying, well, what he's saying is true, why would you believe that they're telling the truth? Why would you just believe them? Why would you just?
Then you don't just believe Trump, right? You just believe,
right,
the mainstream media,
right,
and those awful liberals, right?
Yeah, I hear. But I want to go quick to a couple of questions that have been asked to you in the chat. Let's go from the top. Joost Verbrugge, he wants to know, how does your research relate to the lie detector test? Does it have any relation with it?
Very, very little. So the lie detector test measures arousal. So to the extent that that people feel arousal when they're lying, then this will show up as a physiological response. I should note that in part the effectiveness of lie detector works on the extent to which people believe it works as a lie detector. So a good polygraph examiner's job is to persuade you that it works, so that when you're lying, you will react to the question.
Right.
And at least in the US, lie detector is used less to detect lies and more to solicit confessions. So what they'll do is they'll tell you that you failed it, right? And so you might as well just admit it.
Right. Okay. And when you cross-examine that with your research. Do you think that's a good strategy to catch a liar?
From what I know about working with some, kind of people who use lie detection as part of interrogation, it can. So really good polygraphers first try to persuade people that it will work. The other thing is when they see somebody reacting to a question, they know that people are reacting to the question. It doesn't mean they're lying. And then what they have to do is they have to couple it with really good questioning. So for example, if you ask somebody about, did you do a crime? A victim of crime might react to a crime question, just like a perpetrator of a crime might, right? So we know that, if I'm asking this question and, the lines go up, we know they're reacting, but we don't know why they're reacting. They might be reacting because they're lying, but they might be, so a really good polygrapher, right, will try to narrow down the question and find out when people react or not to try to get a better, and I think, it's not foolproof, right? But with lots of training and used well, and particularly in situations where you're after some very precise information, things like, do you recognize this weapon? Or do you recognize this place? So the more specific it is, and the better it's going to be. It's really bad at like, have you ever done something wrong in your life, or
You have to be very specific, right?
Yes.
I got a raised hand from my partner here, Martijn. So, Martijn, what's your question?
Yeah, Tim, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I have a question about my children. My children are currently 12, 14, and 15 years old. And do I understand you correctly that the chance for me to detect them lying is also 50%? Or,
Yes.
or is it, in other words, is it in some way dependent on the age? And my second question would then be, from what age is it going to be difficult to detect them lying?
About 7 or 8. So as children start saying false things at 2 or 3. So deception requires a cognitive ability called theory of mind. So in order for me to effectively deceive you, I have to understand what you're thinking and know that what I know is different than what you know, and that what I can say can influence what you know. So children can start saying false things as soon as they begin talking. But it's not really till kind of somewhere between 3 and 5 that they can start using deception as adults understand it. So so if they're hiding in a sandbox, it's not till somewhere between 3 and 5 that they understand that they need to cover up their tracks, right? Because somebody else can and see those. But even at 5, their lies are often not very plausible or very, very transparent. But then
Martijn's children are what now? How old are they?
Between 12 and 15.
Between 12 and 15. So he's in trouble, I guess.
Yeah. So by the time they hit teenage years, it's hard to detect as adults. Also, lying changes over age, right? So little kids will start experimenting with it, which is entirely normal. Lying reaches its peak in teenage years. Teens have more to lie about than anybody else, and then it gradually climbs over age. In a study we did with teenagers, they lied about twice as much as college students, and college students lie about twice as much as adults. In the college students, it's interesting. College student lies peak every weekend and decline during the weekdays. There's these like regular patterns. And I think that fits into one of the surprising studies from our high school study, which is, I kind of thought that high school students would lie most to their parents, but that's not who they're lying to.
Oh,
They're lying to
good
their
news.
peers.
Okay.
And I suspect it's a whole lot of kind of trying to make good impressions on other people sort of lies.
Right. So it's more status lying than it's about status.
Yeah.
The lying they do. Yeah. I want to make a kind of a left turn, but I wrote down some of my favorite quotes from your book. And I want to have your thoughts on that, and also because I gradually want to take us to also the theme of this talk, Making Business Human Winter College Tour. And there are actually 3 of them, and I have to do with the same thing, but I'll read them out loud here. People think all kinds of things. We shouldn't impose high-level strategic thinking where it might not belong. That's number 1. Even absent a truth default, people just don't have the meta communicative skills to act so strategically. And what we say pops out of our mouths without prescripting or strategic scheming, and we accept most of what other people tell us. So what I love about these quotes is that it is sort of diametrically opposed to what we talk about when we talk about other people, right? Especially in the workplace, about your boss or about, your colleague, your coworker has done a crap job or whatever, or is trying to kiss up to the boss. And of course, also we talk about other people like our in-laws, but we think everyone is scheming to get things done in their own interest. That's what we think, especially I think in the workplace. What's your take on that? Because in fact, we don't.
I think our experience in everyday life seems to support that people are, but the research, at least that I've done, I'm not sure. So when I got into research as a graduate student, my area of interest was persuasion and not deception. And I was working on an area called compliance gaining. And there's all these kind of strategies you can use to try to get people to do things. You can ask, it's foot in the door, you can ask a small request, and then once they agree, then you go for the big thing or you can do the opposite, door in the face, where you ask for a big, and you're going to get turned down, but then you drop down to what you want to do. Or you can give people a favor first. There's all these, all these variations on it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just watch people when they're favor asking, they do 2 things. They either just ask, hey, would you do me this favor? Or they just ask and they give like some little reason to it. Would you give me a ride to the airport? Because I'm going to be gone for a week and it would be expensive to park my car. Right? And so researchers were coming up with these ever longer kind of lists of strategies. And this is great if you're training somebody in how to be persuasive. But if you're trying to understand it normatively and what people do, and there's one of my favorite studies, now deceased Professor Charles Berger at UC Davis, who had people, he was studying plants and strategies. And his experiment, there's different variations on it, but you'd give people a map and they would have to explain to somebody else how to get there. And then the person wouldn't understand them or would pretend not to understand. And people's reaction to kind of failed plans is almost always repeat what you said louder and more slowly.
Right.
Right. They don't go to plan B or plan C or plan D. They speak more slowly and louder.
And that's how when I didn't really speak any other languages, how I used to order some bread in France. I just screamed it louder in Dutch.
Yeah.
Eén brood, één brood. And then they still would look at me like, what? But anyways, so but
Yeah, but I think
that's
all this triangulates on the idea that, humans aren't really good at seeing the future. And by and large, people, aren't playing multi-level chess most of the time.
but that's what I
They're,
find so, excuse me for interrupting, but that's what I find so interesting is that when I think about, the workplace, when I think about business, then it's all about strategizing and it's all about, making your plans, trying to get ahead. If you're an individual as an organization. So are we like being unhuman there? Is that going counter nature, or is that just another way of working? Because you're
so
actually what you're saying, I think, is
in my organization, which is a university, the upper level administrators put a great deal of effort into creating a strategic plan and into strategic planning.
Mhm.
And I hope none of them ever hear me say this.
I'm recording, by the way.
It strikes me again and again and again that very often this is just kind of for show, right? And what universities do, which is, teach students and, do research, is largely done by people who don't pay any attention to the strategic plan at all. And are going to do the same thing regardless of the strategic plan.
Right.
And the strategic plan has kind of a disconnect between the real functioning. And so I don't have the big perspective to know how much, and there certainly isn't a control group, right? Because we don't know how the organization would be different without the plan than with it.
Right.
So it's kind of counterfactual to wonder.
But isn't that one of the big takeaways from, I think, also your research, is that we tend to live our lives and also do our research, trying to get some control or some feeling of control. But when you look at real life, and that's what I love about your research, it's about thinking, how do we do this in real life? Do we actually lie a lot? Do we trust people or not in real life? And also, do we work by plans? That's also not something we don't really, we try to get control, but we can't. So
yeah, I think we work by habit, probably much more than by plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the best predictors of what I'm going to do later today is much more about what I usually do than what I plan to do.
Right. So first of all, we want to try to detect people from lying, then we should get into a habit of asking questions, sitting down with them and stop closing our eyes, maybe even. I remember Malcolm Gladwell saying that for his job interviews, he doesn't want to see people anymore unless it's really about how they look. But if he wants someone as a PA or something, he just talks on the phone. He doesn't want to see them. So make that a habit, but also try to make it a habit to ask the questions, right? To look for the specifics that might make them, bust them or not, right?
But only when it really matters. Because for most of our kind of more mundane interaction, probably good just interacting with people, right? Not worrying about it too much.
Right. Yeah. That's also what we do most of the time, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. I saw a remark from someone coming in here. Let's see. Nice to read. Sapiens from Yuval Noah Harari. Did you read that? Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Do you know him? Tim?
I'm sorry, I was just opening up comments. What was the question?
No, it's not in the comment section. It's someone who wrote a personal message.
Okay.
It's about how we think we are as humans is how we really are. It's about, and she also mentions, the person who wrote this comment also mentions a book about a Dutch person, Rutger Bregman, his name is, and De meeste mensen deugd, which means like most people are good people. And I think it's a big hit, that book, but also the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, because it shows that, people actually are not what we really are to believe, or being believed by, people who taught us how to behave, people in business schools, people in, how to politics. So it books like that, and also your research kind of points us in the direction that we should stop some habits that we have created about, strategizing or disbelieving or trying to figure out how someone else is thinking by just looking at him.
No, it's I think it's definitely a case. I think one of the biggest problems in business and organizations, probably socially too, is occasionally you run into these, maybe this is a tangent, but maybe it addresses it, is
We'll see.
that occasionally you run into these people whose perceptions of themselves depart from how everybody else sees them. So another one of Professor Park's, my favorite studies of hers that nobody knows. She had people in work groups, each kind of report about themselves, and then report about everybody else. And what she found was there tended to be consensus in how people are seen by other people. But there was a surprisingly small correlation between how people saw themselves and how other people saw them. And how well the work group functioned was much more how everybody else saw, and would they see it positive? So I think what sometimes happens, my phrase for this is self-other mismatch.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get people who tend to have a self-view that departs from everybody else's view of them, this makes interaction really, really weird, right? It's like we're being in a play. And I'm gonna use a metaphor here from the sociologist Irving Goffman. It's like we're in a play, right? And everybody knows the script, except we got this one actor who's playing in a different play than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're reading different lines than, right? And the play just gets weird, and it makes it throws off everybody else. So I think one of the huge implications of this for organizations is that it's really important that everybody kind of has the same playbook, who kind of everybody understands the roles and the parts they're playing, right? And that of course, the better people are playing the role, the better it's going to function. But it really gets weird, and you really get problems when people are going off different scripts.
Right, but that, I guess most organizations do have like job descriptions and stuff like that, so they have some sort of role play to begin with. But
for job descriptions, but for personalities and for, right? So it's when people see themselves as different than everybody else sees them. Right? So it's more than just, it's the character you're playing, right? And complete with all the personality and all the mannerisms and everything. And so it's not just a job description.
So, but that would be like what you're suggesting is that you should have like a detailed job or a personality description of this is actually what culture is, right? That tells us how to behave, and so if people drop off that,
maybe just honesty where you can work it out, because at least in American culture, when you get these problems of self-other discrepancy, part of the problem is nobody ever tells the person that, hey, we all see you differently. Right?
Yeah.
So this gets momentum, right? And there's, I don't know, I wouldn't know how to do an intervention on it, but
well, maybe it brings us back to your actual. Well, I guess it's also the sort of where your research has come so far. It's also, at least it's where the book also in your presentation sort of ended. Is you should how can you detect a liar? How can you behave normally with each other? How can you cooperate? Is by opening up the communication level more to than just looking at each other, but also talking and asking questions and being specific and, trying to figure out where the incoherencies are. And I guess most dialogues in organizations just stop at what we think is what is going on here.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Being mindful and listening to what people say.
Right. Yeah. We're running somewhere toward the end. I was curious about what other people, the silent majority in this conversation is thinking right now. So I prepared some sort of a Slido poll. I don't know if you know it. I don't know if anyone else knows it. But while we get in the answers, Tim, let me ask you just one other question. It has to do with a lot of things we talked about, but I understand a lot of communication science, a lot of people in the communication science community aren't really just, elated with your work, and not everyone is embracing it, right? So, what do you think that is? Why if your research is pretty thorough, so what do you think people don't accept it?
I think there's kind of two issues. One issue is people tend to have a vested interest in their own. So to the extent that my work contradicts kind of what they're doing,
Right.
then maybe a little bit of defensiveness might be understandable. I think also my work tends to be a little bit more edgy.
How so?
Well, my whole thesis, right, is that people are misunderstanding things, and I'm setting the record straight. And that could be seen as not playing nice with others.
Right.
Right. And a couple of years ago, I had some refugees from a hurricane in Florida from Miami University over at my house for kind of a professor get together. And one of them, who's a very well-known full professor, says to me over drinks, I hope you never go after my research. Right? They've seen me criticize other people and they don't want to be on the other end of it. So you could see how that would make people a little uncomfortable. Right.
But so you think it's just that? It's not, I don't hear you say maybe they have a good reason to think I'm wrong, but it's about self-defense actually.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of kind of academic back and forth. And this is going to sound so arrogant. I'm really embarrassed to say it. But in the sake of being honest. So every time I've been in kind of an academic back and forth with another professor, I've always presumed that there was something I was missing. And I was always waiting for the argument that I missed.
Right.
Right? Because we know about confirmation bias, right? And it's so naive to think that we don't fall for it. Of course I think I'm right, right? And if I'm gonna try to live up to my open-mindedness, I've got to be open to that possibility, right?
Right.
And so every time I've been in one of these back and forths, I always wait for the great argument that I didn't anticipate.
But you never get it.
Right? It goes along with being strategic, right? I presume that people are thinking a few moves ahead, right? When I'm debating with somebody, I try to anticipate what they're going to say. And, right?
Yeah.
And if I don't have a good rebuttal to that, right, then maybe I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying. And, and I get in these debates and I'm waiting for the great, counter move. And they just don't come.
So, yeah. That's what if I look at your...
When I say that, I feel horribly arrogant.
Right. But I guess then probably I mean, I'm not a scientist, but if I see all the work you've done and the way it's been done and it's redone and redone, I think I've seen a lot of repeats of your own research to see if you're really right. And I guess then probably it's pretty safe to say more than 54% that you're right. So, yeah.
You know, it's all the next study, right?
Right,
Things-
exactly. Yeah. What I see some people have answered the poll question about what stuck with you most, and if you can see the answers, right? What of them is which one of them sticks out to you? Which one surprises you, or when do you want to comment on?
I'm guessing that Ruth bias is truth bias.
Or maybe someone really likes Ruth.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I got a thing against Ruth. People named Ruth.
Biased against Ruth, yeah. I believe Ruth always tells the truth. But is there another one that's not like probably a typo that sticks out to you?
They all look pretty on target.
Okay.
You know, the people are nice, people are good. You know, it's an important theme. The social interaction and get connected is an important theme. The Ruth bias and we're so gullible is an important theme. You know, perception plays a very, very big part of it. The origins of lying and why people lie are on target too.
And that's
Yeah,
actually
people are paying attention.
Okay, well, that's a compliment for everyone at home. So, if I want to wrap this up for myself, my takeaways, I think, has been and is also today when I hear you talk, is that there's a very practical message. I guess it's don't guess, you know, what other people are thinking about, what they're up to. Just ask them, and it sounds so obvious that I guess I forget it lots of times, and just, you know, think that I can figure out what people are meaning and just go on with my business. But I'll stop this, and before we stop, because we have come, it's for us here it's 6:30 p.m. For you then probably is 10:30, I guess, in Birmingham, the greatest town in Alabama. We've come to the end of this show, but before we say our goodbyes, I would like to ask everyone at home to once more put on your camera so we can see everyone that's still there, so we can know that we haven't been alone here. I know there's still 39 people that hung on here, didn't have any kids probably that needed food. Hi, everybody. I hope, Tim, I can see you here in the center of my screen still. So I hope you and I stay in contact, but I hope everyone else will stay in contact as well. If they have any, you know, afterthoughts, can I send them on to you, Tim? If they have some questions you want to keep in contact.
I'm pretty easy to find. I have a web page and a university page and a Gmail account that's on my web page.
Okay, cool. So you don't have to contact me then. If you have a question for Tim, you can just find him online easily. Okay. Well, a big thanks to Martijn as well here. Thanks for your presence and your contribution. You asked one question, but it was very nice to have you here. Thanks also to Arvin. Arvin, are you there somewhere? Maybe we can. Do I see you? No, I guess he's being anonymous. But he helped us out with the questions, and he also helped me prepare everything for this event. So thanks, buddy, for going through all the motions that COVID brought, because we went from seminar to small scale event to online. So it was a very turny and curvy road. And I especially enjoyed the result we had today. I hope everyone else enjoyed this. So thank you, everyone that joined us online. Thanks for your participation. And although I didn't see you the whole time, thanks for your energy and your support. I thoroughly enjoyed it. See you all next time for the next MBH college tours on December 10th.
Can I ask one question?
Sander Lemmers, yeah.
Tim.
One last question.
Sure.
How are your knees? How are your knees?
I'm sorry. Say again, please.
How are your knees?
How are my knees?
Yes.
I'm not getting the reference to that. I'm lacking some context.
Sander, can you please elaborate on why you're asking this question, if it's not a very stupid one?
Nick's basketball player.
Ah,
My knees are perfectly fine. As it turns out, I did not have a long basketball career.
yeah, that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, well, Sander. I'm going to mute you now. I put that on, by the way, because it was in Tim's book, and it was actually on a poster. I think there was some in the hallway on the university, and most people believe that you were actually drafted by the Knicks and also played in Soundgarden, but it turned out to be untrue. It's also another example of the truth default, I guess, that people just, if people poster like that, it must be true. So as I was saying before, Sander asked this very important question. I hope to see y'all at our next MBH Winter College tours on December 10, January 14, and February 11. More information about those after we hear from the Dutch government about the new COVID rules. But the online version was pretty good for me. I hope it was okay for you. If you have anything to say, please put it in chat or call me later on or email me or whatever. I enjoyed this. Thank you very much, and have a good night. Thank you, Tim, also, of course. Bye-bye.
And the sound notes.
Release 20 acres and 1 ginny mule from the Alabama Trust. Half of the cotton, third of the corn. Get a handful of dust. But we cannot have all things please us. No matter how we try, until we've all gone to Jesus, we can only wonder why. I had a daughter, called her Annabelle. She's the apple of my eye. Tried to give her something like I never had. I didn't want to ever hear her cry. We cannot have all things to please us. No matter how we try, until we've all gone to Jesus, we can only wonder why. When I'm dead and buried, I'll take a hard life of tears from every day